Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, the coaching search commences. What kind of bait are we fishing with? Next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Raider! Everything runs through Lubbock.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Always appreciate being your first listen each day on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. He's the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan, and coming to you on the other side of what was an eventful week, to say the least, as you saw some basketball resolution on the court for the Red Raiders. And, of course, leadership-wise, we saw resolution there with the resignation of Mark Adams, and now beginning to process what that means exactly, Chris, as committees are put together, hot sheets are put together, hot list, hot board. I don't know what your hot preference is, sheet, board, list, whatever. Search may be in there as well. It's up to you, as I don't want to call it a scramble, but there is a bit of a frenzy. As we talked about time being of the essence last week, Chris, with transfer portal windows opening up and so many things going on as Texas Tech is searching for a new head coach. Welcome to a new week, Chris. Great to be back with you again.
Yeah, and as we kind of reconvene here, what's fascinating is that just over a week ago, I'm going to the arena for the game versus Oklahoma State. I have no idea about what has gone on with Mark and a player and that had gone on. I find out about it before that game, really didn't have any indication that it was going to be like a national story or whatever, and I probably didn't have a lot of the context either. And it's just crazy because now you fast forward basically 7 to 8 days later and you've played two games and there's nobody working for Texas Tech basketball anymore. I mean, and that is really hard to process. I mean, you've basically wiped out your staff. You don't know what your roster looks like, and it all happened very, very quickly here. As we now know, Mark, has obviously stepped down and he's been bought out and for half of, I believe, what he was owed. And they basically have kind of, wiped out. I say wiped out. I mean, they've basically, indicated it's up to the new staff on who will remain working here, if anybody. But we wish you well, kind of thing. And that part is really, really hard to see that happen because some of these people did nothing wrong. They did the job the best of their ability, but this is the business that they're in. It's just the business of college athletics these days. But it's just wild that because 1 week is not that much time, and it's just so much changed in 1 week.
Yeah, and will continue to be that kind of way, right? I mean, you're going to have to remain on red alert status. Stay ready, friends and neighbors, because whether it's some guys in the uniform, as we'll get to some player movement and possibilities coming up in just a moment, or obviously trying to reassemble a leadership structure for this program, time, again, is of the essence. So, Chris, I thought it was really interesting to see some of the initial steps taken. I want to get to a search committee and some of the presences and personalities that are going to be a part of that, already are a part of that. And also, I guess, processing on local radio over the weekend, some sound from a very prominent Texas Tech basketball supporter, that being Dustin Womble. There are so many things that just since we last talked are kind of now out there in the ether to consider as far as what the next phases or stages are going to be.
Yes, you want to go through those now?
Sure.
Kind of how let's do that. So obviously, on Wednesday you play. Last Wednesday you play your last game. I think it becomes public knowledge that night that Mark had stepped down, and then you start to see the next day ish that buyout, what the dollar figures were, how much he was actually owed, and then, what now? And so what Texas Tech has done is that and this is fairly standard with the way that they've operated in recent years, this is kind of how they came to hire Mark. Well, I say part of it, but this is also how they kind of came to hire Joey as well. They have retained the services of a search firm. And so let me explain, typically, I think you can get the search firm to do as much or as little as you want based on, how much you want to pay them or what you want them to be responsible for. But you kind of gather that this search firm, their duty will simply be to, because if you're Tech, you say, you get together and you go, okay, what are we looking for? Do we want style of play? Do we want young? Do we want old? Do we want, how much can we afford to pay? They need to have head coaching experience. Are we worried about that? I mean, there's all kinds of criteria. You basically just give this to the search firm and say, what do you get back? And the search firm knows agents. They have the lay of the land for the most part of the sport, and they're going to know these people, this handful of people would be interested in talking with you about this job based on the criteria that you've laid out. They would take this job at this salary, or they fit the mold of what you're looking for and all that stuff. And then it's up to you to take the 3 to 10 candidates, whatever it comes out with, and you can kind of decide, okay, we'll talk to these people. Because I think one thing, Casey, that's prominent to mention here is that people were mentioning Will Wade's name. He's just been announced as the head coach at McNeese State. So he goes from LSU to McNeese State there in the Southland and drops a level significantly. He's still got some NCAA stuff that he's sorting through right now. It has not been ruled upon. But one of the things that I wouldn't be surprised if they sent to the search committee is, we don't want anybody with any NCAA baggage or any.
What about FBI?
Yeah,
how about FBI baggage, Chris?
That too. So that's why I just find it far-fetched that the Sean Millers and the Will Wades would be actually real candidates here. I just don't know if that's the route you would want to go. Again, could be wrong. Just me.
That was kind of jarring to me, Chris, to see so much, and it was just kind of fan smoke mostly. It seemed like on the internet. So maybe I'm silly for paying it any mind whatsoever. But to see some of those names that did emerge among those groups, and I'm thinking, wait, is this just what it is now when you're trying to compete at the very highest level? It's like, well, they hadn't locked him up in the stocks in the public square yet, so he's still available to run my men's basketball program. And I'm not really telling you that's wrong or right. I don't know. I was really trying to come to grips with, I wonder if this is like, hey, you want to compete with the big boys, then you better consider some of these big boys, quote unquote. And I know not all those we've mentioned are, equal, but a Patino or a Wade or a Miller, there's a certain category out there, and I may need to apologize to some of those guys. They don't want to be associated with one or the other. I don't know for mentioning them in the same breath, but you know what I'm saying? There's a category out there of vetted, tried and true, made man college basketball head coach, right? And when you get into these times, a lot of them are going to show up on these lists, and then even some others of those are actually going to be hired and may find success again, even if they've got some things in the closet you're not proud to put on the front page of the paper.
Yeah, because I think what you're worried about there is that if they've had issues recently, I think that if there's any issue on your watch, it's not going to be good for you, specifically maybe through the NCAA, because they're not afraid to make an example of the Oklahoma States in the world, which I thought Oklahoma State got hosed in their situation, and yet the Arizonas and the Kansases and I guess the LSUs kind of seem to skirt from a lot of that. And there may be still some stuff hanging out there that hasn't been ruled upon, but Bill Self missed some games the beginning of this season. Nobody's ever going to remember that. The schedule laid out to where he didn't really miss any real basketball. I think that was quote unquote self-imposed and all those things, but they still won the Big 12 and are going to be a likely one seed in the tournament. But so that's what the search firm will do. That they will, and I think, like, for example, I think one of the names, Grant McCaslin's name has been tossed out, and I think one of the names that, Paul Mills at Oral Roberts, I think, Andy Kennedy, I think, you just have to pay attention to kind of the lay of the land on who's doing well from a mid-major standpoint. I think, that search firm will give the school those names. And then you have we call it the internal search committee, which is, Kirby, Dusty, Joey McGuire, and then Lawrence Odiase. And I think that is I thought that was all interesting. It makes sense. I think when you look at the different segments that it would represent, if you will. I think my wife was like, Lawrence, well, that's awesome. Because and I think, tell me anybody that has anything bad or bad memory or anything of Lawrence Odiase. You just don't. He was on the Final Four team. He played in the national championship game. He's right behind the bench last year.
Possibly an aluminum manufacturer, the way he was crushing them cans that day. I'll just say that. But no, otherwise, no one.
Yes, that too. He addressed the student body and told them, hey, chill. I think what's fascinating is I thought about this. Lawrence Odiase and Joey McGuire, before that game versus Texas last year, they were the only two people that took the microphone and basically addressed the student body and told them, hey, we're here to yell, and I want you guys to have fun, but chill out. Don't do anything stupid. Don't whatever. And I thought, and those guys end up being on this particular search committee. I think that's very telling. But it gives the players a bit of a voice, and former players, and I think that the younger person's view
very
of kind of
former player. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Exactly,
Very
and
recent.
somebody that played for the whole thing. So he's got some serious street cred.
Sure.
There it is, Lawrence. And he left here Lawrence wasn't the best. He'd be the first one to tell you he was the best player on that team, and that was either Culver or Mooney or whatever. But he was the spokesperson. He spoke for that team. When Chris during that journey wanted to get the voice of the team and would ask the team, because there's various decisions you have to make along the way. Like, hey, we're on this road trip. They've given us a shoot around time of 9 a.m. Okay. Do we want to sleep in? Do the guys need rest, or do we want to get up and like be hardcore and go hit the shoot around time, even though we don't play till that night? Hey, Lawrence, what do you think? It's stuff like that. Lawrence was largely responsible for speaking for the team and deciding, hey, we're not gonna have cell phones in our room on any road trip the night before games. They would leave them down in the team room so these kids could get a night's rest and not be distracted and all those things. But Lawrence was the one ultimately deciding that and kind of speaking on behalf of the team. So just to give you an idea of that. And then Joey, I think I said it to you the other day, man. I think that you're trying to find the basketball version of Joey McGuire. No better person to try to find that than Joey himself. And I think Joey would probably tell you Jerome Tang is that. Based on their relationship, you can see the social media stuff that they've had back and forth with whenever he got to Kansas State and just them well-wishing with each other. They were really close friends, I think, in Waco. I don't think Jerome Tang is going to leave Kansas State. But point still stands in that Joey knows very quickly the lay of the land here. He knows the fan base. He knows what it takes. He knows that you can get it done here. And I think that I don't know how much input at the end of the day that like a Lawrence or a Joey would have, but helping vet candidates and getting a good vibe and bringing up different points that, other people may not think of from a player or a current coach standpoint. I think it's pretty smart, actually.
And you want to speak about the opposite of that, Tang remaining in Manhattan? Come on, dog. We're not going to make you wear lavender down in Lubbock unless you want to, but I'm not going to tell you got to. I'm glad you bring that up, as a matter of fact, because I have a question for you about what pond you're actually fishing in as a basketball program. And I'll get to that coming up next, Chris, on Locked On Texas Tech. But first, today's episode brought to you by Built Bar. The Built March Madness bracket has arrived. I know you got your favorite bar or puff, and now's your time to make it count. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorite and maybe be a winner in the process. I'm voting for that churro, baby. Team Churro 2023. Let me know where you're at BuiltMarchMadness.com. When you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you're going to be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. And not only that, but one Locked On fan is going to get a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your doorstep. You can't beat that. You got to try Built right now. If you haven't before, Built is the best protein bar ever. For real. So amazing. You're not even going to think they're good for you. What makes Built Bars and Puffs so good? For starters, all high in protein, low in sugar, covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right. Real chocolate. So run to builtmarchmadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff, churro like me, or go your own way and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March. So hop in and support your pick at builtmarchmadness.com. Glad to have you along for the ride on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making us your first listen. Hope you'll check out as well the Locked On College Basketball Bracket Breakdown. Grab your bracket, go check it out with national analysis and the insights from our local experts. Locked On College Basketball's Bracket Breakdown is the spot to be with everything you need to make the most informed decisions on your bracket, or stick to doing what you always do, I guess. Jersey color. Find the episode on Locked On College Basketball and become an expert today, as the brackets are getting busy as we speak. Wherever you get podcasts, you can find it, or on YouTube, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris, I said just a moment ago, as you brought up the name of Jerome Tang, Manhattan, Kansas is where he's at as the head coach of K-State, has had a very successful season. He's in what would, for all intents and purposes, still be considered a Power 5 realm. I know that's already an antiquated phrase in some ways, but I'm going to keep using it for the sake of this conversation, because I'm really wondering, as you sit here in search of a new leader for Texas Tech men's basketball, what kind of pond you're fishing in. And not to ever say, hey, there's a cap on you. Don't dream of anybody above this level or in this kind of conference or whatever it might be. I'm not trying to suggest that at all. But I do have a feeling as a Tech basketball fan, and I wonder as a fan if you agree or disagree, that really as a program, almost for the first time since you have since you've upped your stock, since you've filled your tanks, since you've hung some skins on the wall, since you've built a $40 million building, you've had this wide open opportunity to search for leadership. I know you kind of had that with the Chris Beard departure, but the connection to Mark Adams and so many things that went into that, I don't feel like are exactly like this situation. So I really wonder, to use another fishing analogy, where you casting that bobber, baby? Is there really a limit on where Texas Tech could be poking around for that guy? Or how do you see them approaching kind of the terms on which they may meet the next head man of Texas Tech men's basketball? But you probably got more sell than ever as a basketball program, I would think.
I think you have a really good job. I think those of us here probably overvalue it a bit. I think that's fair to say. I happen to think this is a good job. Others around the country may slightly disagree or strongly disagree with that. That's fine. I go off of that based on facilities. I go off that based on support. I mean, because there's just not a lot of places that on a bad night put 12 or 13,000 in the stands, which is what you're doing. I mean, some of your bad crowds are bigger than other people's buildings in general. That doesn't mean make it a good job or bad job per se, but that goes a long way with, I think, the coaches. I think, facilities wise, and we mentioned Dusty here. I mean, he did the university about as well as you possibly could have with that particular facility for not just your men's program, but your women's program as well, because it's one of the best in the country. I'm not saying it is the best, but it is one of the best in the country. And it gives you some serious advantages because it's got all of what a player wants and needs to succeed and ultimately maybe continue their career at the professional level. And I think those two things go a long way. I think, the NIL component is interesting because I think NIL is going to be a factor here. I think they're trying to get a wrangle on that a bit. And I think, you heard Steve in an interview he did over the weekend kind of talk about that a little bit and how it's very confusing. It's something they're trying to get, a bit under control or more organized or similar to what football's doing. I mean, so I'll let other people kind of sort through that, but I do know that there's some NIL opportunities here, and I think that is not always the case at other places. So I think that is certainly a benefit too. But And I think your league is something that, because depending on where you're coaching right now, you could be fourth in a Power 5 league. You could be second in a mid-major and still not make the tournament in some cases. I think here that's the beauty of being in a Power 5 league like the Big 12, which is now going to have 14 teams in it next year. But, I think the bulk of your league is always going to go to the NCAA tournament, okay, in most years. I mean, in a bad year, it's 5. In a good year, it can be 7 or 8. I mean, that's enticing to a lot of folks, because this is all about the tournament, and success in the tournament is ultimately what you're looking for. And, yeah, you want to win conference championships or be in contention for those. But so with all that said, and I believe that, and I think I said something similar to you immediately after this all happened about, money that you're willing to spend on this job. Look, do I think Texas Tech can pay a really good salary? Yeah. Do I think they're going to do that just to do it? No. Okay. I don't think they're going to spend money just to spend money. If it requires it, if you have to beat somebody else out for a guy, or beat an offer out at the whoever this is, current institution, I think you would be willing to do that to a certain extent. But it's all based on what this person is worth and what you feel he's worth. And I don't know the candidates yet. We don't know who you're competing with for certain candidates, because when you start wanting to talk to somebody, odds are somebody else is wanting to talk to them as well. Maybe their current school wanting to redo their deal, and and so
you kind of hope so, I guess. That somebody else is wanting to talk to them.
Yeah. But I think you could fish in a pretty big pond here. But I mean, the coaching deal is a bit different than it used to be, in that there's not just a ton of household names in college basketball as much as there used to be, in the long time coaches and this and that. I mean, there's been some more movement. There's a lot of people out there that a lot are not necessarily familiar with. And I only say that to say there are really good coaches at all levels of basketball. I mean, really good coaches. Does that mean that, and there's big names that are out there too, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that's the best fit here for what you need right now. You follow me? And so
Sure.
that's up to the committee to kind of determine, man. Like I think Rick Pitino is a great example, and if they end up hiring Rick Pitino, then you will all have to sit here and hope that it works and it makes sense and all those things. But he's 70. He's an East Coast New York guy. And I just don't know. My opinion would be, I don't know if that's what's best for your program right now, because how many more years does he have left? I would think you'd be wanting to hire somebody with the intention of, man, we'd love to give this person a second contract, and maybe even that's typically, not that you want to hire somebody that if they do good will never leave. You don't do that. I just don't know how many more years he's got left to coach. So that part is, and so I don't know how good of a fit Rick Pitino would be in Lubbock, Texas, based on his age and based on where he's been from before, and basically lived most of his life. He coached for the Celtics, coached for Kentucky. He's at Iona now, and on it goes. The Knicks and on. He's just an East Coast guy. So I just that's a good example to use. So, but I think you can operate in a lot of ponds and fish there. I just don't know what exactly makes a ton of sense, because this job is different than other jobs out there. Every job's got its own, hang-ups or criteria that I think you need to be successful here.
That's a great answer, and you gave me some different perspectives on a couple of different fronts there, particularly one being the conference aspect of it, because I really thought about, can you go get a head coach? And I'm not really so much as hung up on a name as maybe if you got one from a major program, and I don't mean blue blood, but more so Power 5 or recent, somewhat successful program, that would get my attention. And I would feel like, all right, well, there's probably a college coach there that's proven on the level that you want to be successful on and is willing to give your job a look. And I wondered how much the conference aspect could play into it in your favor, Chris, because you play in the best conference. When you were giving your answer, I almost thought you're about to spin me around the other way there, though, because you made me begin to consider, is the Big 12 intimidating to some coaches in that maybe your 7th or 8th place one year or another could be in a tournament when they're not in another league versus being in Big 12. So I don't know. It does sound like maybe the conference does play into the minds heavily of that coach. It has to. I'm hoping more for Tech's sake that it could be appealing versus playing in some of these other leagues. But I don't know. Maybe there's some of that as well that you say, nah, I kind of like this path to seeing the Aggies in a conference championship game or tournament championship game.
I think most coaches would take it as a great honor to be a head coach in this league or in this time frame. I think that's the way most coaches think. There may be others out there that go, I kind of like it where I'm at right now. It's easier to succeed. They're paying me well. You know, I can get it done here. It's not near as hard and all those things. But I think a lot of coaches view this as like a hell of an opportunity, because if you make it here, you know, not to go Frank Sinatra, but if you kind of can do it here, I mean, you know, odds are really, you know, you're a made man at that point, you know. And I think hence the reason that, you know, you talk about a guy like Jerome Tang and all that, because he was picked last in the league, and they finished like they did, and I think in year one, and I think that people all of a sudden look at it and go, holy cow, I mean, he did it in the toughest league in the country, maybe in the best year of that league that it's ever had. And so I think that, you know, and now obviously his challenge, if he stays at Kansas State, will be to continue to do it, which is the hardest part, is to stay consistent. That's why, like him or not, Bill Self, you know, has been able to sustain greatness there at Kansas. But, you know, I think though that here, you know, there's a lot of, and that's why if you're Texas Tech, you may take a second with your search. And it may, because you really need to try to be sure, and you've got to have buttoned up, because this league is hard. We just saw it play out for the last 2 or 3 months. You better have your staff component locked up. You better have a grasp on what you're doing NIL wise. You better have a grasp of your roster and things like that, because it is not for the faint of heart. Like, you can be average in some leagues and still succeed. Not in this one, because everybody's kind of pushing their chips to the middle of the table. And guess what? When Houston enters this thing, because they are the number one seed in the Midwest region in this year's NCAA tournament, you know, they're not going away, you know, at all. And if I was hiring an older coach, that's the guy that I would back up the truck for. I'd hire Kellen Sampson in a heartbeat if I was going for an older guy. I mean, that guy, you know, some issues a long time in Oklahoma, but now that is laughable that would been an issue. But I mean, you talk about culture and toughness and consistency. I mean, they've been rolling for how many years now, and it's not going away. And they play in a league that allows for more success than what the Big 12 does. However, that's just an opinion on my standpoint. A lot of people have a lot of good things to say about a guy like Kelvin Sampson. So not his son. His son's Kellen. So that's why I just say about the league, you know, because people, hey, you know, you charter flight to places. You can feed your guys here. You can coach pros here, and that's what you get in the Big 12 conference. I mean, how many NBA guys did we see throughout the year? I mean, you saw 2 lottery picks in your league that are freshmen. That just doesn't go on, you know, in a lot of leagues. But this is going to be a fairly constant in this league, and you get players that want to play against the best, and then you get coaches that want to coach against the best. And I think that's more often than not, your league would actually be a positive, not a negative.
Today's episode brought to you by America's #1 sports book, FanDuel. And now is the perfect time to download the FanDuel app. Become a new customer, because new customers get that no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't hit. So just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today. Safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line, point scores, 3 points drained if basketball is your thing, or all points in between. Underwater basket weaving, anyone. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with that same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
More often than not, your league would actually be a positive, not a negative.
you want the dude that feels that way about it anyway, right? I really
Correct.
feel that way. You want a guy that wants to
1,000%.
compete among the best. So regardless of how they feel about it, I guess at the end of the day, you are wanting that guy, and you'll wind up with a guy that's willing to take on that bigger stage, those brighter lights and tougher foes that you have been getting in the Big 12 conference. Can't wait to get to the point where you have some resolution offered there, as I'm sure things get whittled down with candidates. And again, personally, Power 5 conference or otherwise, doesn't matter to me. It's about the fit and what those who are in charge of making those decisions see fitting with Texas Tech men's basketball and Texas Tech, Lubbock, and West Texas in general, Chris. And at the same time, I think you can be excited as a Tech fan because you've probably got more to sell as a men's basketball job than you have at any point in your program's history that I can imagine. I mean, I'm sure there have been some big catapulting points, or maybe you got some attention you wouldn't have otherwise. But with some of the resources, recent success, and fan fervor, I would think still very much there and motivated to be back in that building and watching a winner. I hope you're able to attract some very interesting options. We'll be here, obviously, to cover from top to bottom when those options do emerge. Speaking of options and speaking of tightening things up, as you mentioned a little earlier, Chris, one of the things that we're so curious to see tightened up or otherwise is the actual roster. Your team of basketball players. A new coach will have some guys to re-recruit. And, of course, as we sit here today, if you're joining us all across Locked On Texas Tech Nation, maybe a bit of vertigo out there for you as we are within a transfer portal window. You see animals acting weird, goats walking in a circle. It's because it's transfer portal time, baby. And Chris, I know, regardless of the change in leadership, it was safe to say we're going to have a pretty interesting offseason roster wise, right?
Yeah.
Was that fair?
Yeah. And I think Cowan, that's going to be the biggest challenge, the immediate challenge for whoever is hired here. And I don't think that, and this is what's tricky, is I don't think Texas Tech needs to be in such a hurry for fear of roster building that they immediately get somebody in here so they can kind of salvage this thing. But you also just can't take a long, long time either if you can help it on making a decision as well, because there's roster decisions that are imminent. And we are about to enter the beginning of when players can enter their name into the portal. And I think that you're going to get a lot of names entering the portal. Let's just go through these guys. Like, I think Fardaz Amac basically indicated that he was going to enter the portal, shortly after the game took place this past week. It doesn't mean he's leaving, but I think you have to protect yourself if you're these players, and you can allow yourself to be contacted legally and all those things by being in the portal. You can always remove your name from the portal and say, you know what, never mind, I'm staying put. I think Davion Harmon, I've heard he's moved his stuff out. I've heard different things about him going pro. I don't know if he would be even entering the portal. He may just want to go try to see if he can make a go of it overseas, or may just be done with college basketball in general. I think that is to be determined. We've seen lots of reports out about Elijah Fisher. I think that he may, in fact, enter the portal, but I don't know if that means he's for sure leaving. He may be in a wait-and-see mode, which I'd be willing to bet that a lot of these freshmen do the same thing. It's not going to surprise me if Pop does it, or if Robert Jennings does it, or if Lamar Washington does that as well. Again, get your name in the portal. It allows you to weigh options, and then as the hiring process comes aboard or comes along, you can say, you know what, man, I think I'm good. I like it here. I like what this guy's telling me and all that. Or they may bail out too, depending on how long it takes. I think that's fair. The tricky names, though, Cowan, here's a whole separate category that we get into that I think is kind of fascinating, because, and I may be off here a bit, but because I think KJ Allen could also enter the portal. I'm trying to think of who else on the team. But let's go through these names. And if I miss somebody, Cowan, we'll remind me.
Yeah.
But, let's talk about Jalen Tyson, Kerwin Walton, Demorion Williams, and Daniel Bacho. And I guess Kyron Lindsey would be in this category as well. These are guys that transferred here from another institution. They've used their one-time exception. So if any of these, the way that the rules read, if any of them were to leave, they would have to sit a year. Okay. And that makes it a little less palatable on wanting to leave. Okay.
Sure.
Now here's where we get into some gray area. Could they file a waiver with the NCAA saying, man, I don't like what went on here. I suffered through mental anguish, or my mental health is not right because of what we've endured here because of this dysfunction of the program this past year, which is what other people have called it based on, because I think it's important to note, and I think Dusty even indicated this. Mark didn't step down because of what he said to a player and quoting the Bible and the misunderstanding there. I think as they got into this, there was a lot more things. Hence the reason you take half of what you're owed here. And so I think it just was best. All parties wanted to be separated and go on down their way. But, can one of those players because, Bacho came from Arizona, Walton from North Carolina, DeMarion Williams from, was it Gardner Webb? You had Kyron Lindsey came from Georgia, and Jalen Tyson obviously came from Texas. Well, they are either in the midst of sitting out in Lindsey's case, or they were eligible to play immediately. And the only reason that Lindsey had to sit out is because he transferred that semester and he was a freshman. He was only going to have to sit out this spring semester, and he would be immediately eligible next fall when you start play in early November. But I don't know if those guys, without a waiver being granted, I don't know if they would be allowed to transfer and be eligible immediately. So that may entice them to want to stay here. And then you get into, what does a new coach want? Does he want this guy to stay or this guy to leave? Or how many guys am I attached to? How many guys from my current team can I bring with me? How many guys do I know out there in the portal that I either recruited that I know are looking for a spot that I would love to attract? I mean, so it's all like domino effect, and I don't really know what your roster is going to look like, but I would say you keep your head on a swivel, because in the next week to 10 days, it could be up and down, and it may take a lot more time for it ultimately to play out, because you need to get somebody in here that, can build a roster. And there's a whole separate topic, Cowan, that we can get into when we have time about how many visits you have available to you as a basketball program, that is going to be tricky trying to manage your roster as well.
Sounds like fun and sounds action-packed, Chris, as you try to navigate these waters as best you can with so much uncertainty. But we'll be here to discuss it with you on Locked On Texas Tech. So appreciate you again for making us your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. Check out Locked On College Basketball for your second listen right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, available anywhere you get podcasts or on YouTube. Chris, thanks for the time as always, man. Appreciate it.
Keep hope alive, man. Yes, sir.
You got it. And we'll see you out there for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.